My name's Emma Fulu, and it's a huge honour for me to be able to moderate a panel discussion with these incredible humans. Let me briefly introduce them. Well, Tarana probably needs no introduction, but Tarana Burke, renowned activist and founder of the Me Too movement, with over 3 decades of experience organising within issues facing Black women and girls. Welcome, Tarana.
Thank you.
Kolbasia Hausu is a director of survivor leadership and influencing at Freedom from Torture. And in 2006, he co-founded Survivors Speak Out, a network led by survivors campaigning for survivors. Welcome, Kolbasia. And Jack Key, a feminist tech activist who has worked at the intersection of technology, gender justice, and feminism for quite some time. They are also the co-creator of the Take Back the Tech campaign and co-founder of Newman Fund. Welcome, Jack. So before we get into our discussion, I just wanted to ask you all, if you could, can you raise your hand if this is your first SVRI? Wow, my gosh, so many new people. That's so cool. Can you raise your hand if you've been to every single of the 8 SVRI forums? Ooh, there's a few of you. Amazing, amazing. Wow. So for me, I've been to 7 of the 8 forums, everyone except the first one. And for me, each one aligns with a very significant moment in my life. I feel like SVRI tracks my personal story in some way. The first one, I brought my newborn baby. It was in 2011 in Cape Town. I was breastfeeding, and it was the first conference I came to as a working mom. And I know there's some people in the audience doing the same, so welcome, breastfeeding mothers. In 2013 in Bangkok, some of you may remember, I was the ridiculously pregnant one. I was pregnant with twins, and 4 days later I gave birth to my twins. And so they are turning 11 on Thursday, and I'm flying back early because of that. In 2015 in Stellenbosch, I had just actually had a mental health breakdown, in part from doing this work. And I know that many people doing this work have experienced similar things. And actually, SVRI, one of the themes this year is around integrating mental health care, self and collective care into our work, into our research and practice. In 2017, I had established my own organisation and brought my whole team to Brazil, which was wild and fun. In 2019 in Cape Town, I had just gotten divorced and was reimagining and rebuilding my life. And then in 2022 in Mexico, we were all just emerging from COVID, and I think we'd been through a very tough couple of years. And now we are here in 2024, and I must say last night was like a big family reunion, and that is why I love SVRI forums so much. For me, they're very personal. But they are my moments in history, and I feel like every SVRI forum is also trying to meet the moment, trying to evolve and grow and integrate what is happening in the world with the work that we are doing in this ever-changing space. And so today I really want to talk about this moment. What moment are we in globally? GBV is connected to so many of the major pressing issues of our time: climate crisis, wars and conflict, the rise of authoritarianism, backlash, tech and AI. And so let's unpack some of this and see what we're doing this year and how we can really meet the moment. So I wanted to start with you, Tarana. The Me Too movement was years in the making, but also a moment that catalyzed this incredible change. And now it's gone international, which is so incredible. But we're still seeing obviously incredibly high rates of sexual violence all around the world, impunity, as we heard with that performance, systematic protection of powerful men. We've just had obviously the Diddy example and the Mohammed Al-Fayed with the ex-owner of Harrods. So what are you seeing in what's improving, what's this global moment we're in now, and how you're seeing that play out in the sexual violence space?
That's a simple question.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. I think that when I think about all of these, the place that we're in right now, it feels like it's a crisis of humanity. You know, I think that we can list out all of these other issues, but the sort of overarching issue that I don't think there's enough conversation about is like this sort of crisis moment that I can, depending on the day, I can look at, you know, optimistically or pessimistically, to be honest. I think from one perspective, there is a reality that the world has changed rapidly in the last 20 years. A lot of it has to do with technology and advancements in technology. And our human development along with that has suffered in many ways. And ways that I think, there's probably research somewhere in this room about, but ways that sort of in the mainstream conversations we're just not talking about explicitly. There's so many laws and policies that have passed, which are an advancement, right? We have any number of changes in different countries around laws, but what's not happening concurrently with that is a shift in culture, and shift in how we, it doesn't matter how many laws and policies you have if people are not moved to follow, if they're not moved to behave differently. And I think this rollback or crisis in humanity is super critical, and people are maybe now starting to see it in a different way because of some of these big mainstream cases, because of so much of this spotlight. But from the optimistic side, I also think that when you have moments, historically, when you have moments of crisis like this, it is because you're on the precipice of a new and different world or time or, you know, reality. And I think that the world can't bear the weight of this crisis much longer, right? There has to be dramatic shifts in how we live and relate and connect to one another. The extreme forms of violence, the rise of authoritarianism, you know what I mean, across the world. It is, and I'm gonna wear my optimistic hat for a minute. I really do believe that it gets worse before it gets better, right? And a lot of this is because we are winning. And there's no other path but a path forward that is about people who are deeply connected and rooted and love each other in a different way than we see now. And that that's inevitable. And for people who that scares, for people who recognize that means a loss of power for them, a loss of privilege for them, they are fighting like hell to keep the status quo. And so while we're in that fight, we are seeing this rise of all of these things. And whenever there's a crisis in humanity, women, girls, femmes, those who are the most vulnerable, those who are on the fringes the furthest are going to suffer the most. And that is the moment we're in. I am emboldened, though, by the amount of people who are mounting up the fight to push back from that. But this moment does feel, it's so difficult. You know, we have to have these kind of conferences. We have to gather and find community to work our way through it. I do believe we're close to the other side, but my God, trying to get there is very tough.
It's hard. Yeah, I mean, the dark before the dawn, right? That's where we are, the dark before the dawn. And it can feel overwhelming when we're in the midst of these multi-crises. But I love hearing that optimism and that we can hold this love in the work that we do, even in the midst of crisis, I think. And maybe I'll bring you in Basia in here. You know, we obviously have to acknowledge that we are in the midst of horrific wars and conflicts around the globe at the moment. And that is having, you know, a direct experience. And as you said, those who are often at the most sort of marginalized spaces. And someone, you know, as someone with, you know, lived experience of this, how do you see this moment we're in right now?
Thank you. I mean, first and foremost, I really want to say how honored I am and grateful I am to be in this panel of great names, you know, sitting here. And also, secondly, I really want to commend you, all of you that, you know, 1,500 strong here in the room, because certainly, you know, you probably have something else to do, but you decided to be here because you want to create a world where, you know, women can be free, women can live free of fears, you know, girls can live free and free of fears, that we can end sexual violence and we can really prevent, you know, sexual violence. And, you know, thank you for all the work that you guys are doing, you know, tremendously. I think every time that I wake up, hear conflict pop up here and there, the first thing that comes in my mind, how many more victims and survivors are going to be added in the list of already endless lists that are happening right now. And I think as a survivor myself and somebody that decided early on to make sure that, you know, my voice counts for something positive, I come across meeting quite a lot of, you know, survivors. Early on, I was in Colombia. I met about, you know, 600 survivors. I'm going to be in Colombia next month again. And I also was in Kosovo just a few days before coming here, where I met quite a lot of, you know, survivors, you know, as well. And, you know, I go around, you know, talking to survivors. Early in June, I met one of the survivor of, you know, the October 7th in DC, and also I have quite a lot of conversation with, you know, my friend Palestinian, and those who have the family right now in Gaza and going through that horrendous, you know, situation there. But one thing that really hurt me the most, you know, recently, just a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to one survivor in Sudan, and she said to me, you know, Kolbasia, why everybody is ignoring us? Why nobody talking about our case? Are we not suffering enough? Or are we not human enough for our, you know, plight to be also, you know, highlighted? And when that's gonna stop? And I think, you know, the challenge, you know, for me, and certainly the challenge for all of you, is how could we, you know, create more awareness of all the conflict that's happening, whether that is in DRC Congo, whether that in Tigray, whether that in Gaza, whether that in, you know, Ukraine, whether that in Israel. How could we give legitimacy to all those voices of the survivors and of the victim? How could we really make sure that people start suffering? And how could we really help those leaders, you know, like trigger happy that, you know, for them, life does no matter. They're just happy to kind of to trigger any conflict, you know, left and right. So those kind of struggles that every single day when I'm facing with those kind of questions, I'm struggling with. And sometimes I feel really powerless, you know, powerless, and in a sense which, and sometimes then it trickled out to how emotional I became and how that can affect me and also trigger, you know, my memory of my own sexual torture and how I have to flee, you know, my country and then find exile, you know, in another country. Is it that something that, you know, other people are going to do? And also, is not everybody have the chance to do that. And if they don't have a chance, and if they're living in the conflict, what support system in place for them? how they can rebuild their life and how they can look after their families and so on. So I think that's my, daily challenge for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we must keep these at the forefront, right? It's heartbreaking to hear those story and people feeling like the world has forgotten them, and the feeling of powerlessness that brings. And I mean, I think part of the power of a room like this is that it is elevating and bringing to light stories from all over the world. And I'm sure we will hear some incredible things over the coming days. Jack, I want to bring you in. I hear the word powerless, and sometimes I think that we feel like that with tech. It's like overwhelming, and we don't really understand it. And I wanted to just ask you a kind of broad question, I guess, around like help us unpack, the multiple relationships between tech and GBV, good and bad, as you see it.
Hello, everyone. I think we need a whole conference for that, no? Like, let's unpack the universe.
We'll organize a several.
Yeah, SVRI, right? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for sharing, and I have been listening I have a bunch of things I prepared to say, but I feel like throwing them all away. Because it's true, it is right now a seriously heavy moment. It is actually quite crazy how much, even this 1 year alone, what more the last 20 years, how many things have happened. And Tarana, when you were saying in the last 20 years, we've really experienced a whole bunch of different crises, and then this kind of competition, like this sense like we have to compete to be seen, right? And it's not an accident that all of this has happened in a time where digital technologies and digital infrastructures have become a singular driving force in how we shape our institutions, our spaces, our resources, and our political power and relationships to each other. From the very intimate, like how you connect as friends or as family, to the very structural and systemic in terms of how we enact our wars and our conflict and how we witness them. I don't think we ever have had in the history, contemporary, in living memory, the ability to see live the kind of destruction and devastation in the same space where we share really important, private, loving expression. It's very dissonant, and it's very bifurcating. And I think it's fair to say, actually, I don't really know what to do with this. It's a lot. And I think with that, I'm in a room full of people who are very thoughtful and with deep experience and understanding and knowledge about gender-based violence. Why gender-based violence, how gender-based violence, how it is really not an expression of violence, but also really about control and subjugation. It's a way in which we organize social relations and political power, and it's not an accident that it is on the axis of gender, sexuality, race, and all other kinds of intersections of embodied identity that these violence happen. And so I think the only thing that I would say is bring that deep understanding and analysis into unpacking the politics of technology. I think our mistake sometimes is just thinking about technology as a tool, as a thing, a thingness that you can either wield, right? It's a double-edged sword. It's for good, it's for bad. I think we need to put that metaphor and analogy aside because it doesn't serve us. It's more than a tool and a thing. It's an infrastructure, it's a force, it's a political domain. And right now, most of us are not in the decision-making spaces around that. Whether in terms of imagining what technology is for, or who is intended to occupy it. So it's not an accident that so many women and girls and queer people, the minute you go online, you get attacked. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that a lot of women and people in political power, whom you're not supposed to be in these public spaces and political power, that you get harassed and attacked. It's not an accident that technology, the surveillance capability of technology is being used to further control, track, and monitor the movements of women and girls and trans people. So I think take all of this in, like, you know, all of your feminist brilliance, right? Like everything that you know about how the world is shaped, and just take that critical, inquiring mind and put it to tech. Like, what's the governance model for this? Who is accountable when a lot of the violence that is taking place is not only in the homes and in the workspace and in public spaces, but also in digital spaces? How do we think about accountability and remedy differently when the spaces are privatized now, and privatized in a way that is only owned by, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 companies, right? So I think it's that question and that kind of like offering to not feel powerless, that actually we know a lot more and have a lot more to offer, and that technology-facilitated gender-based violence is not a new thing. It is part of the continuum of gender-based violence, and we know this, and I think to engage with that.
I love that. Thank you. I mean, it's a political domain, right? Just like everything is a political domain. And all of this and all of the things that we're talking about are about power. And I mean, I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Tirana or Kobasi, about this. I think it's fascinating, Jack, how you talk about this. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that it's being used in this way that is repressive. It's designed to exclude people of a certain type. Is there anything to add on that sort of political domain, power space before I move us on? Or?
You want to start? Yeah, I have something to add, but please. All right. Thank you. I think I mean, it's just a little bit of story. So I migrated to the UK in 2005, and I was really traumatized. And I had the opportunity to be referred to an organization which I work for now, called Freedom from Torture, where I went through a rehabilitation. And a year in I had like a 4 years rehabilitation there, therapy there. And in my second year, I was really questioning, you know, myself, my stories, and also what defined me, and so and so. And all what I look around, and especially at the organization Freedom from Torture, so many decisions that has been made for the benefit of the survivors, that included me. And all those kind of decisions, when it's made, I'm not there. I'm not part of decision making. Decision made, and then, you know, I have to just to go by. Policy changes, you know, services is redesigned, redeveloped, but nobody asks me how I feel about the current services I'm receiving, the support I'm receiving. Is it those support really meeting my need or not meeting my need? So then, you know, I start thinking about what can I do in order to kind of to reverse my experience, which is I am recognized within the organization, also within the society, as a survivor or victim, as a vulnerable person, and so and so. But I know that it's more than that, and that's not what defined me. So how could we really flip the coins around? It's not to be looked as a survivor, as a victim, as an expert. So I brought other survivors together as a network, what we call a survivor speak out network, and then we made quick decision that any decision that will be taken which will impact on us should not be taken if we are not part of the conversation and part of the decision making. And I start really developing what quite a lot of people call now the survivor-centered approach. And when the UK government decided launched the Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative, I think some of you may know about that, in 2012, I immediately engaged with the UK government. I said, if you designing an initiative where the actual beneficiary are survivors and a victim, that initiative has to be so centered. And it's not about we, come in a platform, talk about testimony and about, how horrible and, make people emotional, people cry. That's not what we are all about. How could we really develop the initiative so that it's around survivors? If you want to prevent something, how would you prevent it if you don't understand the impact and the consequence of? So I think, that's how, for me, I feel that it's a systematic excluding, survivors and victims. And how could we turn it around? I think some of them is by design and some of them are not by design. But how could we, turn around? So any project that we start, we always start from the point where it has to be survivor-centered if, the ultimate objective is for the benefit of survivors. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's so powerful and so important.
Obviously, I 100% agree. I think that not only are we experts, but we are leaders. And I hope my sisters in the audience, I quote her all the time, Joanne Smith, who's the founder of Girls for Gender Equity in New York, who says, we come to the work because we are the work, right? And this idea of creating the idea of it, tech-facilitated violence and it being a political domain, I think about domains of power in politics all the time. And the fact of the matter is that we have to become our own political domain, right? We wait constantly for people to insert us inside of things, and it doesn't work that way. It has not worked for us in so many years. And the reality now is if gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence is going to end, we are going to be the ones to end it. There are tons of survivors who are silent, tons of survivors who won't speak up, but there are millions more of us who do, and we have to create that political domain. We have to create that political reality. There are very few places in this world, on the globe, where survivors have a political home and a political voice. And that's why, there are certain conversations happening even here at this conference about what a unified agenda looks like, right? Who are we collectively? We come at this work from various different ways, whether fighting against tech, whether you're fighting on the ground, whether you're fighting in conflict, but we're all fighting for the same thing, right? Our bodily autonomy and liberation and freedom. And that has to happen collectively with multiple interventions, and we have to be on the same page about that. And I think that this, for instance, in the United States, which is on the globe, by the way, for those of y'all who didn't know that. But in the United States, the conversation about sexual and gender-based violence, and I think this happens actually in a lot of places around the world, is couched always inside of other things, right? And it's almost like a feeling of we'll get to it. And, we are told oftentimes if we can just get, women's equality, we'll solve that problem. That's not true. That's just not true. If we're not fighting for these things at the same time, if we're not talking about safety and equality, it's not going to happen. We can't just leave it to people to solve it for us, which is why we have to be proactive in a particular kind of way. Those who know the recent history in the United States, what was it, 2 years ago we had January 6th where people tried to overthrow our government. When you talk to the most powerful women in the country, the most powerful women in the United States who were in the halls of Congress, who are senators and congresspeople who are there on that day, what they talk about is their fear of losing their life and being sexually assaulted. They feared for their life and their safety, which means all that power that they had accumulated meant nothing.
Yeah, in that moment.
It meant absolutely nothing in that moment. So if we're not talking about equality and equity, at the same time we're talking about safety, we won't get there. And nobody else is going to carry that conversation except us, because we know that intimately. We know and understand very intimately. We are the experts and the leaders. I 100% agree with that.
Thank you, Tarana. I mean, I actually think that it's not just that we won't get there if we don't focus on safety alongside equality, but actually if we focus on safety, we will solve all these other problems.
Exactly.
Right? Like, we know it improves education outcomes, we know it improves health, we know it improves, you know, so many other aspects that we're working towards in social justice and development. So I absolutely agree. And I love this idea that we have to become our own political domain. I want to take us now from the political domain to the research domain, which is always still also political because everything is political. But I mean, SVRI is obviously focused on research, but research in the broadest kind of sense. It's not just academic form of knowledge. But I think, you know, as I've seen the SVRI forum evolve over the years, I think it's even really called into question the notion of evidence and whose voices get heard, and even, you know, really asking us to critically think about our own research practices and decolonizing our practices and looking and being self-reflecting on a lot of that. I'm interested, maybe I'll come to you, Jack, around how research has informed the work that you do and how you use it, and just if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, super happy to. But before that, I just also wanted to say how awesome to think about us as a political domain, like, you know, feminist and women's rights organizing and the fight against gender-based violence as our own political power. I'm going to take that with me. And also being reminded that so I started being an activist by working in a shelter for women who've experienced violence, either by their partners or employers and so forth. And that's like, you know, my first foray into understanding kind of like structural and systemic power. And then I got into technology by accident, by going into a workshop and then somebody really showing me, actually this is a site of power, and that's how, you know, it has expressed itself through history, and this is how it's expressing itself now, from history to imagination, right? And then I got completely burnt out because doing this work is hard. It's really hard because, you know, we are here because also it helps to make sense of our own experiences of violence, gives us a framework to engage with it. And then I got completely burnt out. And then, like all nerds do, I healed by burned out by reading a lot of books. So terrible, please don't do that, but also great. Find more ways. Then I was approached by this organization called Association for Progressive Communications, who said, hey, come and do, you know, you just did your master's, can you do a piece of research for us? We think that there is a connection between emerging digital technologies and the experience of gender-based violence, which is the work that you've done. Can you do this piece of research and see where that goes? And that was in 2005. So we knew that people were experiencing this, something was happening, mobile phones, SMS. So 2005 predates Twitter, I think. Yeah, I think it predates Twitter. So it, like, you know, it's a while ago. And then I was having access to all these like academic journals at that time, and also talking to a lot of like, you know, different activists in different places. And there was next to no information about this. So we had to explore this anew and think about a kind of like framework to also how to approach this subject. Because as you said, technology already makes you feel very overwhelmed, and there is a deep gender dimension to science and tech, right? Like it's constructed in such a way where it's not supposed to be for women and girls, or like, you know, or for most of the world actually, it's just supposed to be for a tiny part of the population, which is based in North America or Western Europe, of particular kinds of bodies. And so then how to talk about the actual reality and experience of violence without, again, excluding and creating fear. So how do we think about this and engage with it, but not like, you know, make it feel very scary? So then the last chapter of that paper was Take Back the Tech, which is also how the campaign came about, because it builds from the Take Back the Night campaign, right? It is a public space, it is our space. How has violence excluded particular bodies from being able to occupy all spaces? And it's the same with technology. So from Take Back the Tech, it became this global campaign, and then a big piece of this global campaign, and I think that's the thing with like, you know, trying to understand the impact of emerging digital technologies on the very familiar experience of gender-based violence, is engagement with the communities and the people who are most affected by it to unpack and understand what this issue is and the priority is very critical. So a big piece of that work was also about doing crowd mapping on how is this being experienced, where, what spaces, what kinds of support you can get if you go to, what are the different barriers and so forth. And I think that's a key practice in how we really try to also not only understand the expanse of the issue and the impact, but also the development of responses and solutions, right? And who's involved in that. I think, especially when it comes to online gender-based violence, I think there is a rush to legislate. No, we have to put a law there, and then a lot of really not great things and does not serve to affirm the rights and dignity and autonomy of women. It gets slipped into the law because we are rushing to legislate, and the people who are most affected are not there in the conversation. And I think we've heard already previously, that is the key and critical ingredient, factor. So then in Numun, the fund that we just started, seeded during COVID times when we all had to move our organizing online, this is also a really important value and practice for us, really to try and understand, okay, what is the shape and the form of the movement, what are the organizing, what are the needs, what are the gaps, who are the communities that's being worked with and so forth, so that it informs how we do our work and it informs how we understand what the organizing is and ourselves as a political, site of political power and domain. And I just wanted to share one thing that we realized when we did our first open call. So the call is really to the larger majority world. This includes Africa, Asia, and so forth. And when we received the number of applications, the initial applications, the top issue that everyone is working on in terms of feminism and tech is safety and freedom from violence. Yeah. And the top 3 movements that applicants were from, the first is gender-based violence, the second is digital rights, and the third is LGBTQ. And I think that already demonstrates the kind of intersections of who is doing this work and at the front line and how important this is in terms of what we are advocating for.
Thank you, Jack. I love that example because it kind of just points to the power of research. It was research that led to this amazing campaign and informed, responses and solutions, which is, I think, really why we're here and why we're doing research is to lead to that change. So I think it's such a great example, the Take Back the Tech one. Kolveasya, can I bring you in? I know you've talked, we've talked a bit about the importance of, survivor-centered approach in the research space as well. And I just wonder how research has been informing your work.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm gonna go from the opposite, side of the lack of research, and how I deeply experienced it, and how I wish I had kind of research report that I can quote in. I think two examples, one recently and one little bit older. So I'm going to start with the recently. I think three months ago, I was invited by the White House in DC to have a conversation with the Vice President Kamala Harris, because she has a policy that she launched, and they wanted to understand from me how they can make the policy survivor-centered. And I mean, I say the usual thing that I need to say. And then she said, but I hear quite a lot from people advising me that it's really complex and delicate to involve survivors and victims, because they are vulnerable. And that moment where I wish I had research that I can quote it about the impact of how involving survivors and victims are, so I did not have. And also early on, when I started developing survivor-centered approach at Freedom from Torture, I faced quite a lot of pushback from my other colleague clinician and clinical and therapists, where they always quote that people are so vulnerable that you cannot engage them on that. And I think 2016, I did try to do like a mini research, like just small, like 100 people, 100 survivors sample, people that really been engaging in doing engagement, advocacy, campaigning, people that use their experience into, shaping decision. And from that mini, sample, it became clear how impactful their engagement in the matter, how it helped them raise their confidence and help them be more outward looking, more engaged in the communities and, do things, and some also change career. And in those things, every time I face challenge is that I wish if, I had, done some extensive research that really can demonstrate why it's really important for survivors and victims. I'm going to explain to you why I use the word survivor and victim, interchanging, engaging on that. And from last year, I'm collaborating with the U.S. Institute of Peace and also Washington, D.C. in developing, few research and toolkit really addressing the issue or the lack of, research and also the lack of toolkit in relationship to survivors, centered approach. And, through that, we also want to create a database of survivors and victims who are keen to learn, research skills so that, they can be researcher as well and also researching in a matter of, sexual violence, gender-based violence. So I'm using the word survivor and victim interchangeably because I was really told by, by survivor. I hope that, if you take something or you take that, away with you, it is that some survivors, decided that, they're happy to be called survivors, and other survivors decided that no, they cannot be called survivors, they need to be called victims. Because for them, as long that they did not achieve the ultimate objective of justice, if they are not satisfied with justice, they have no survivor. They're still victim of whatever that acted that committed to them. So that's why I use those two words interchangeably. It's kind of to acknowledge, everybody, depending on whether you call yourself survivors or you call yourself victim. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. It's a really, thank you for sharing also that the reasoning behind the language that you're using. I think that's important for people to hear. And it's really, it's kind of something we really need to be thinking about more, this idea that there's a lot of people we're excluding from research because of so-called vulnerability, but that's actually not serving those people or serving the cause that we're working towards. I think that's a really important point that you raised. Tarana, I wanted to bring you in and ask about research and anything you want to share in that particular space.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier this idea of multiple interventions, and I talk about it a lot because I think maybe it's not just unique to the work to end sexual violence, but certainly we are an ecosystem of folks who are interdependent on one another, right? The people who are on the ground working directly with survivors, practitioners, the folks who are trying to change policy, the folks who are trying to shift culture and narrative, and the folks who are researching, we are interdependent on one another. And as research comes out, and I've just reading through the program for SVRI, I'm fascinated by the breadth of research that is happening around the world around this issue. But what I know as a person who is in a lot of different parts of this work in the world is that sometimes it doesn't reach where it needs to reach. Those of us who are doing this work need this information, need this kind of information so we can amplify for other people what kind of stories they should be telling, how we should be thinking about this work. We don't have that without research. It doesn't work without having actual information. I was talking to a funder one day, and I was just really frustrated because one of my big frustrations is that these big, philanthropists with billions of dollars cherry pick through the issues around sexual and gender-based violence that they want, right? So, and they elevate one thing over another, depending on the year, depending on what's happening, and it causes us to sort of scramble, right? And it's so, yeah, you can clap for that because you know it's frustrating. And so it is, and I was venting that why won't they just wrap their arms around the whole thing, right? We have billionaires who have decided they're going to do things like stop tobacco smoke or end malaria, which is great. It's great. But also, they won't wrap their arms around the whole issue of sexual and gender-based violence and say, this is solvable. And we have so much evidence about what works, what needs to happen, the shifts that need to happen that come from these places, from this research. It's right here. I'm like, why do they ignore that? So she's like, yeah, we have gone to these people and said, listen, we know this works. I said, there's a piece missing in the middle. There's a way that we have to work, and the we I'm talking about is those of us who are in other parts of the work to end sexual violence have to work closely with researchers to make sure this information is not just going to I'm an organizer, by the way, so this is where this thinking comes from, but not just we go to these rich people and say, listen, look, we did all this, we have the information, we have the numbers, you should pay for this because we can make it better. And they're like, maybe I want to deal with whales this year, but I think that we have to bring this information more mainstream and organize individual people around this. If people understood exactly what was happening, they don't have the information. There's a disconnect between what's happening in the world of research and what's happening in the rest of the world. And so I'm like, yes, we need the money for it, but we need to force people to give that. We need to make it so, we need to raise hell in such a way so that they understand. We have everyday people saying, we know what works. We have the numbers, we have the research, we have the people. There's 1,500 people here who probably have 1,500 different ways to combat sexual violence, and we kind of talk to each other. And so I think one of the things that's so amazing about what Liz and the SVRI team is doing here is trying to bridge that gap to make sure that this information is getting out far and wide. I'm not a researcher by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm fascinated and deeply interested in connecting in what's happening because I want to figure out the things and information I need to take back and say, listen, I got proof. Don't ask me how, but I got the proof. I didn't do the research, but I'm connected to the people who did the research, and we work together, and me and the researchers, we're going to figure out who can write the story, and then we're going to go to the people who are organizing, and we're going to say, listen, everyday people who this is affecting, we know why this is affecting you. And it is just a way, it's such an opportunity that we have to come out of our silos and really, really work closely together because the movement is dependent upon it. We won't shift this needle any further unless we decide how to interweave all of this together, and research is right in the middle of that.
I absolutely agree. Thank you. I mean, this it speaks to my heart because I am a researcher, but I am obsessed with good communication and strategic communication, and it's been the focus of my organization's work for a long time. And I think a lot of us in this room, and I've absolutely seen the evolution over the years, is the recognition that there was a time when research often just did sit on the shelf or speak to a small group in academic journals, but there's been a real movement, I think, and an acknowledgement that there's so many other strategies we need to be thinking about in order for it to reach the right people and influence that change. That's incredible. We're getting close to time. I want to do one last quick question as we finish, and just keeping it short. Why is something like this, the SVRI forum, where 1,500 people gather to talk about these issues, why is it so important? Maybe start with you, Jack. What do you want to get out of this?
I think convenings are really, really important. And at a time when we are facing a whole bunch of different challenges and crises, and where all of our struggles are interconnected, then the ability to be able to sit in a room together and convene and then really share what we know and the realities of the people whom we work with and the communities we are a part of, and then to kind of put our thinking and our organizing together to figure out what we can do is really important. And I think it's also really important that when we convene, we pause. Because I think a lot of times when we come to events and meetings, we're always running from one thing to another. There's like, a million things that we have to sort out, and then there's people we have to meet, and there's this hurrying, right? Because it takes a lot for us to be here. But I think it's really important for us to be able to be here and take a minute to just pause and hang out a little with yourself and with the curiosities you have, and go to a space where you know nothing about, to learn with no agenda except to just figure something, or like something new. And that helps us to maybe dislodge some competition and competitiveness amongst us in organizing that could be really harmful. And I'm new to kind of thinking about resourcing and resourcing of movements, but there's something there that makes us feel very anxious, in a sense of like scarcity. We need to be visible in order to be supported. And if we can put that aside a little in this coming together and just pause and see and be a little open, I think that could take us, one step further. And also just to say, it's kind of exciting to meet quite a lot of people doing technology and gender-based violence work in this SVRI. And I think it's new, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It's a particular focus this year, and it's definitely grown in emphasis.
Yeah, it's really cool, and like seeing some partners in this space as well. And I promised to shout out, so I'm going to shout out to Asmina from Brazil, who's doing this really cool app. Please talk to them. They do really, just amazing work. But yeah, that's what I wanted to,
Elvasia, thank
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is, couple of things. First and foremost, I am, as I said in the beginning, I am very, very honored and grateful to be here among 15 strong, people. And I think, Tarana probably would know that better, but, sometimes you find so lonely, so isolated, try, to raise, the bar high for people to really take into consideration that you too exist. And being, among you here for the last few days, and I don't feel, alone, I don't feel lonely. I want to connect with everybody. I want to fill up my address book, and ultimately, how could we, collaborate more, beyond here? Because we have unique expertise that if we mix it together as a cocktail, I think we're just going to create something, wonderful. And I think I am really looking forward, to get in contact, to touch base with all of you. I cannot see your face individually. I hope that you see my face. And, throughout the 4 days, please, come, talk to me, and then see how we can share knowledge and expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elvasia. And Tarana, final words.
Well, I mean, this is exciting for me. I nerd out on this. I'm the person who reads y'all's researches, by the way. I will download it and read every bit of it. So I nerd out on this kind of stuff. But also, we have our staff here, since we're giving shout outs. I can't see y'all, but I know they're in here somewhere. We brought like 5 members of our staff, our global staff, here. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that, because it's like a professional development. Although we're running the Brave space and working, but there's also a level of professional development. Those of us, we need to know each other. I don't do research, but I'm in this work, and we are conveners and thought leaders and trying to move the needle around this. And so it's the experience of going into and sitting down and listening to the research versus downloading a PDF on a computer and trying to understand it is incredibly different. And so I'm grateful for this space, and I'm grateful to be here in community. We can't, I think we're saying the same similar things. We cannot underestimate the power of community. And I think I have, folks who I know who are in research sometimes talk about feeling siloed and pushed away, but you have to know that you are a part of the pillar of this movement. There is no movement to end sexual and gender-based violence without the work that you all are doing. So we need to see each other. We need to know each other. We need to be in contact. We need to figure out how we can work together. We need to figure out, I don't know, just how to know each other in a way that feels very familiar, because this is it. When you look around and who's in this room, what you see, we are the ones we have been waiting for. This is it. And so I hope as SVRI advances, it'll be more and more, what's the word? Connection. Thank you. I'm bad with that sometimes. But more and more opportunities for people who are outside of research to come and hear firsthand, get new language, get new understanding, and take that back into the work and figure out how we can keep advancing this movement and pushing the boulder up the hill, because it really is just us.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Well, with that, I'm incredibly grateful to all of you for this wonderful conversation, and let's get to know each other.
Let's go.
Thank you so much.